Okay, I'm going to read my introduction to Mythbusting Hemingway entitled Puncturing the Windbags, Getting to the Heart of What Matters About Ernest Hemingway. When I think about Ernest Hemingway and the tall tales associated with him, my mind returns to the time in my life when I first critically engaged with the author's work. Like so many others, my initial entry into Hemingway's writing came in high school with The Sun Also Rises. I was swept up in that libertine world of 1920s Paris and Hemingway's stripped down, no nonsense prose style that mirrored the toughness of his protagonist, Jake Barnes, and later, as further reading would reveal, Frederick Henry in A Farewell to Arms. This created an image, no caricature of Hemingway in my young mind, as the model for the literarily inclined man or boy who wanted to be a man. It loomed large in my thoughts as I traversed different periods in literary history, painting in primary colors and thus lacking in real nuance. As I began my graduate studies in English, conceiving of myself not just as an enjoyer of literature, but also a scholar of it, my eye returned to Hemingway as one whose work I wanted to explore. Here was a chance to build on my enjoyment of his writing and to transform that genuine interest into more scholarly inquiry. I remember one of my professors during that time in graduate school, Barry Main at Wake Forest University, making a point that took apart that broad, simplistic image of Hemingway I had in my mind, something that desperately needed to happen. We were discussing A Farewell to Arms and a course on World War I in American literature and visual art. Professor Main alluded to the fact that people always think they would like to go out and have a drink with Hemingway. They'd want Papa to be their carousing companion, out with them for a night on the town. However, Professor Main continued, given Hemingway's personality and his characteristics, they wouldn't enjoy that experience all that much. He was short tempered, prone to insults and cruel jabs if you did not go along with what he said. Professor Main was trying to get us, a mixed group of graduates and undergraduate students, away from the prepackaged conception of Hemingway as some kind of literary equivalent of Dos Equis' most interesting man in the world, advertising character. He wanted to remove that illusion, bust that myth, if you will, so that we could spend our time thinking about what really mattered with Hemingway, his writing. I thought I was immune to this thinking, but the realization sank in. I too had this image of Hemingway as the larger than life cartoon character, the one who would take you out on a rollicking night on the town and then soon afterward go out to hunt for wild animals or catch a great fish. While there were actual reasons why this view of Hemingway was so prevalent in people's minds, the historical and biographical records clearly show that Hemingway's voracious alcohol consumption was a fact. It was a distortion that went beyond what the author was like to create something unreal. What I came to realize was that puncturing that image did not take away from the majesty and importance of the writing. As I read the ending of Farewell to Arms, the Hemingway novel assigned for that course, there was no change in my reaction from the previous times I'd read that novel. The profound pain and despair of Frederick Henry as he loses both his beloved Catherine and their child, describing how it quote, was like saying goodbye to a statue and walk back to the hotel in the rain, end quote, were crushing. I was sitting in the front desk of our writing center at Wake Forest. After I read those pages, I had to step away for a moment as that pain overwhelmed me and I needed a moment alone to compose myself to be ready to greet students who were looking for help with their assignments. Having this veil pulled from over my eyes did not diminish what I found so powerful in Hemingway's work. In fact, it made me appreciate it even more. I return to that moment when it comes to the myth surrounding Hemingway. So much of what comes to mind when we talk about Hemingway is that mythos. It's easier to engage with the tall tale than with the man himself in all his complexity. I've also noticed that the Hemingway with myth keeps people from picking up his writing that might go a long way in dispelling some of those reductive notions of who he was. For a writer like Hemingway, who has done so much to change our notions of literature and articulated so well issues of pain and suffering and grief and trauma and love and loss, it is a true shame that the work gets overlooked because of what the myth has done. In Authors Inc., Literary Celebrity in the Modern United States, 1880 to 1980, Lauren Glass writes that, quote, no author of authorial celebrity in the modern United States would be complete. No study of authorial celebrity in the modern United States would be complete without a consideration of the career of Ernest Hemingway, end quote. Glass makes a particular note of Hemingway's, quote, worldwide public image as Papa, the indestructible U.S. sportsman and aficionado who became a veritable paradigm of masculinity in the American cultural imaginary. The public personality that Hemingway developed has been an embarrassment for literary critics, end quote. This mythos, particularly as it emerged into a more modern media environment able to greatly amplify and distort, was able to run amok and create a myriad of problems for those looking to perform serious considerations of Hemingway. That Papa caricature of Hemingway, which sold men's magazines and exotic travel and liquor and firearms and on, with an albatross hung around the necks of serious literary scholars who wish to engage with Hemingway's literature in a serious way. All this is frustrating on two counts. The first is that Hemingway, the man himself, was plenty interesting even when stripped of the exaggerated elements. Perhaps his feats and actions were not as grand as the imaginary Papa who is so prominent in people's minds, but he's still one of the most fascinating figures in American history. He was friends with many of the great celebrities of his time, Ingrid Bergman, Ava Gardner, Orson Welles, Marlene Dietrich, Gary Cooper, and did meet some of the famous historical figures too, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Fidel Castro. One does not need tall tales to make Hemingway's life fascinating to the observer. Perhaps even more than that, this focus on the image of Hemingway that's been peddled keeps us from appreciating Hemingway for his most important contribution to the world, his writing. Because of the assumptions based on the myth of Hemingway, we say to ourselves, oh, I wouldn't really like whatever he had to write. This is where that element of embarrassment Glass describes comes into play. Those who might further the true appreciation of Hemingway, who might create scholarship that better analyzes or contextualizes his work, are put off of Hemingway because of this cartoon conception of the author they've been fed. It would be embarrassing to spend one's time and energy studying an author with this kind of image, and thus they pass. This is why, as tempting as it is to say, these are just silly stories, they don't really matter when it comes to Hemingway's literary reputation, we cannot stop there, since they function as impediments to true and full engagement with Hemingway's oeuvre. Other authors suffered from this as well. I think of someone like Jack Kerouac as one whose reputation as an author is getting irrevocably damaged because of the image put forth of him. But the myths that surrounding Hemingway have done the most damage and have had the most outsized effect. These myths are not new. They've been a part of Hemingway discourse from its very inception. Biographer Carlos Baker sent a letter to Hemingway near the end of the author's life, articulating why he wanted to write a biography of Hemingway, someone who was notoriously distrustful of biographers and literary critics. As I think about Mythbusting Hemingway, Baker's words ring in my ears and push me to do this work. In his letter, Baker writes, quote, I would like to destroy the legend, puncture the windbags, clear the air a little, and show your achievements in something like its true dimensions. There has been enough malice and lying and misunderstanding. Baker speaks in words that resonate with Hemingway, destroy and puncture, conveying the action and the force in which Hemingway was perennially interested. Obviously, more important in that statement is Baker's desire to sideline the legend as a way of showing Hemingway's achievements in something like its true dimensions. This project is not about diminishing or denigrating, but rather removing all that is not true, because what is true is even more special. The man and his work are enough. There does not need to be a legend to obscure the feats achieved by the man himself. The work Baker began with his scholarship continues to this day, so much so that one can imagine a modern biographer of Hemingway saying something almost the same as Baker more than 50 years after both the biographer and critic wrote those words. What this book aims to do is to address those myths, which so many assume to be the truth about Hemingway before we engage with the real him. These are the things that have become calcified in our collective imaginations and prevent many of us from having a true engagement with one of the greatest authors writing in the English language. Some of these myths will be debunked and proven to be just that, myth. Others might be proven to be true. Examples of those spaces where myth and reality line up. But what is important is to get beyond those myths and distortions so that we can appreciate Hemingway and his stellar work unencumbered. Thank you.